Good afternoon. Welcome to the monthly DDSN provider meeting. We have some providers in the crowd. It's good to see everybody's faces today and be able to have some conversation. We are kind of on a pretty tight time frame for a pretty big agenda, so we're going to jump right in and get started. I think Carly has a couple things to start with.
Just really quickly, so thanks to everyone for joining the meeting either in person or virtually, and I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. So the agenda items that you see on the agenda were based on the questions that we received through the form agenda and FAQ email address, or that were provided when individuals registered for in-person attendance. As we talk through those updates, feel free to ask any clarifying questions, and what we'll do is we'll scroll through and answer any questions that come in virtually before we open it up to any in the room. The questions and topics that were sent to us are the ones that we're prepared to address today. So if you ask questions, we just may not be able to answer y'all today, right? If it's off subject or, tangential to the topics that were provided to us. And at the end of the agenda, you'll see provider topics. So these are just some big, broad topic areas that were submitted by providers. So this is sort of like an open discussion. Again, you can ask us questions. We might not be prepared to answer today, but we'll follow back up with you. But that's really opportunity for y'all to talk about sort of these areas and give us comments that we'll take back for consideration. So that's really it for me. So thanks again for coming.
All right, Margaret, I think you are up next for updates from DHHS.
All right, great. Thank you, and good afternoon. It's nice to see people in person. Nice to be seen in person. Not quite sure where to look. Bear with me. But just a few updates, and then, as always, happy to take questions. So we are in a bit of transition with some of our finance functions at DHHS. As many of you are aware, some of you may not be aware, Jeff Saxon has retired. Brad Livingston is our CFO, and so he is assisting with triaging questions, identifying where we need to have some clarity issued out to the provider community. So he said, I'm fine with you sharing my contact information, but I'm happy to get any questions that we still need to get resolved over to Brad, and we're working together to work through some of those finance related questions. So I will address a couple of items that I know have been hot topics. We talked a little bit on Friday with the coalition meeting as well, in terms of cost reports and expectations around those. Our intent certainly is to have some level of cost reporting for at least a couple of years as we have switched over to fee-for-service, direct billing, and reestablished or rebased our rates. That is to ensure that we've got some information that tells us, yeah, we are at the right level, or no, we may need to look at this again, just to make sure for a couple of years that we get that information. So we don't anticipate cost reporting to be an ongoing every year requirement, but we do want to do kind of a gut check to say, hey, after a year of experience in the new rate levels and with the direct billing, what does that look like, and are we at the right level that we feel currently? So that will be the expectation. There will be more information on exact format on that. I know that is time sensitive, but we want to make sure that we have enough adequate data, and particularly around residential habilitation for us to look at. We do not anticipate that being a requirement for QPL or private providers. We do want the boards to provide some information to us, but we will take a look and make sure that we've got adequate information, particularly on high management and the higher tiers that we know we need to take a look at. So with that, we also had some questions come up about roles and responsibilities as it pertains to certain functions in terms of audits and the audit directive. We will provide input to DDSN on any proposed changes to that. We expect that to continue until such time as we have formalized the post-payment review that we identified for DDSN to conduct. And that is a DDSN function to oversee that. We certainly will provide input. I know there were some questions around cost allocations and how to handle that. I think we would want to see the draft directive and any updates to that to provide any formal feedback. But again, our partners at DDSN would determine any level of information that they may require beyond what HHS would from a cost reporting or federal guideline standpoint. That's really what HHS would need. Room and board, we see this as continuing to be a DDSN responsibility. When we take a look at it, they are the license entity, they are the oversight, so to speak. And so with that, we see that as a DDSN function for any room and board requirements and calculations. Again, as the licensing entity and entity that certifies. So let me pause there. I've got a couple other updates just related to the public health emergency unwinding and some upcoming communications, but let me see what questions.
I don't have any online yet. Are there any from folks in the room?
Well, we just mentioned on Friday, so this was just Friday, you were going to, I think, get back with Brad, Margaret, on the FTE report and kind of where we are with trying to provide that information to y'all, how you were wanting that information. I'm assuming you don't have an update on that. But
I do not, but again, what we're really going to be looking for is some streamlined information on cost to let us do an analysis to see where we are, but I'm happy to follow up on that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the room? Margaret, I do have one question from Internet Land. It's not really about the stuff that you spoke about, but I think the question is, if there is billing from July to November when the new rates were established, what is the best way to get retro payments for those billings that were sent after the first pull on 12/31? So I think the question there is, on 12/31, you kind of shored up, the difference between, so if somebody has billings after 12/31 that is before July, right? I mean, before November, where the rates weren't adjusted. They're not adjusted in TheraP. Remember, we made that adjustment on a specific date. Should they bill the old rates? Will there be another shore up, or should they bill the new rates through the web tool? I think that's kind of the question.
Okay. Let me make sure I understand.
Yep.
Services that have not been billed yet, but they would be billing for the first time, that incorporate July to December timeframe where the new rates were applied retroactively.
Correct.
So in TheraP, if they are billed, they're still going to bill at the old rate. If they bill through the web tool, the effective date in the HHS system would be as of July 1. So our MMIS, the DHHS system, would treat that as a new received claim and should pay at the current updated rate. If the desire is for it to be billed through TheraP, then we would need to, I believe, do an adjustment for the period, because TheraP won't allow to bill at the new rates for that time period.
Right. And I think the thing, we kind of talked about this a little bit when we set the system up. I think for anything billed through TheraP, we probably need to pick a date that says, no, don't bill any units after this date, because we can't get into this situation where you're constantly running behind, right? But perhaps we could perhaps we could come up with, make sure all of your units for 7/1 to 12/31/22 are in the system. From that day forward, you can't bill anything through TheraP. It's got to be done in the web tool. So to do one last kind of shore up, adjustment.
I think let's discuss.
Yep.
The best way to approach it so that we're clearing out everything that needs to clear out. And then certainly if there are individual circumstances, make us aware and we can work through those.
Okay, so somebody asked to make sure on the dates that the dates we're talking about are 7/1/22 to, I want to think it was 11/30. I'm trying to think of, to 11/30/22 in TheraP. There were old rates. The rates got updated in TheraP on 12/1. So we're just talking about dates of service 7/1 to 11/30/22. If you've already submitted them, do not void them and resubmit them through the web tool, because that's what they're asking if they should do. We can look at an adjustment for those that you've already submitted. And I think we can talk internally about how to push that information out so that folks know kind of what adjustments need to be made. Does that make sense?
Because it sounds like two scenarios.
If you haven't submitted them, you have the option to go to the web tool and submit them and get paid at the new rate. The way MMIS works is if the new rate is in MMIS for $200, but you submit a claim for $5, it's only going to pay you $5, right? That's kind of how MMIS works. Because those rates are coded in TheraP, that's why you're going to continue to get paid at the old rate for those dates of service. I think that's it. Any other questions for Margaret about that?
I wanted to make mention also that, as we know, the public health emergency, federally declared public health emergency is ending on May 11th. The flexibilities that have been in place throughout the public health emergency, specifically for waiver services, were approved by CMS through an Appendix K waiver. That's a temporary authority. We do have up to 6 months after the end of the PHE to unwind those flexibilities that were granted under that authority. So there will be information coming out by a Medicaid bulletin that's going through final reviews now that steps through the information, all the flexibilities that were put in place, any that we are planning to extend, and any that will be ending as of the end of that authority period for the Appendix K. So I wanted to let this group know that communication is coming on that. It's a little bit different time frame than some of the other flexibilities for state plan services or other functions, but be on the lookout for a bulletin forthcoming on the Appendix K. It will be rather lengthy. We've tried to group it in a way that makes sense because we have 8 waivers, 8 sets of flexibilities. Some of them are similar across all programs. Others are specific to a particular group of waivers. So we've tried to make it as clear and straightforward as possible, given that there's a lot of different scenarios, but that information will be coming. And then finally, we are in our final review and compilation of information for the HASKI waiver renewal. We will be sending that up to CMS at the end, no later than the end of March. So we're doing our final review and response to public comment that has been received during that period, as well as several waiver amendments that are in process as well. So those will go up to CMS at the end of March. Those are my updates. Thank you.
Yes.
Are we able to ask questions, Lori? I didn't want to cut in front of anyone that you got online.
Sure, there's not any
Okay.
questions online. You're good.
Related to the PHE ending in May, are we anticipating or aware of any of the CMS requirements changing? For example, certain facility types require vaccination against COVID. Are we aware of any of those changes with the PHE coming to an end or continuing?
I'm not, are you, Jalen?
Okay.
I will say, one of the things, I hope you guys took advantage of the Medicaid eligibility training that was done recently for residential staff and case management staff. One of the things that happened during the PHE is Medicaid hasn't done reevaluations for eligibility for Medicaid in about 3 years. So those are starting back up on April 1. And you guys need to be super mindful of getting those reevals, because anybody who's not in an SSI category is going to receive a reevaluation packet over the next year. And if folks drop out of Medicaid, that's going to severely affect like how you bill and your funding and that kind of thing. So we did do the training. We are posting it online. There was one done specifically for ICFs, and then one for residential staff and one for case managers. Margaret's folks are trying to get us a list of everybody in our waivers and what pay cats they are. We're going to try to do some more targeted assistance to you guys, as well as internal audits going to do kind of a resource audit of your residential folks to try to make sure we don't have people with, you know, too much money and resources sitting in their accounts. So. All right, well, if there are no other questions for Margaret, we can move on to Quincy. I will tell everybody online, my computer is giving me a hard restart, which I cannot do away with. It's going to restart in like 30 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and restart while Quincy's talking. But if you put your questions out there, I should be able to pick them up when I get back. Go ahead.
So everything that I'm going to say is kind of piggybacking off what Margaret's already said. We had a conversation Friday with HHS talking about who's responsible for what going forward. And we've gotten a lot of public comment or a lot of questions from the provider group. And please keep those communications coming to us, because it helps us, you know, figure out where we need to look first and what are the, you know, the top priorities of you guys. But the first, and I guess the most common question was, when is DDSN going to release an audit directive? The short answer is we're currently exploring combining our audit directives, the 275-04DD and 275-06DD, into one audit policy. Our goal is to have a draft out for public comment at the end of this week. So hopefully you guys will be able to start commenting on that this week. We've also received questions if the ROAP will be required going forward. Yes, DDSN is still requiring the agreed upon procedure audits this time until we can stand up a post-payment review, and then we'll look at that, you know, re-exploring that at a later time once that's been stood up. Is there still a requirement to submit quarterly reports? I think they're also known as the smart sheets that were required, that were based on, that were in the administrative standards document. The answer is no. I don't think, when I went and looked at those smart sheets, they haven't been updated in quite some time, a couple of years, like 2021, 2022. So the answer is no. There are a lot of finance policies, even the administrative standards, that are undergoing a revision process now. And you're not going to be required to submit those quarterly financial surveys and reports going forward. FTE reporting, I think Margaret answered that. I think I have anything else as part of the questions. Do you guys have any questions out there?
Kristen, I don't know if you can see any questions online, but I have not back in yet.
I don't see any currently.
All right, so with that, we'll move on to Ann for quality management updates.
Thank you. So I have 2 items for our forum this afternoon. The first is the swallowing disorders checklist. A provider had requested an opportunity for discussion about the checklist. And just for reference, we have a Directive 535.13 DD, which is our requirement for an annual checklist to be completed for each person in residential services. Based on this annual checklist, folks who know this person best should be completing the form. So, and if there has been a choking incident with the individual, then we want someone who witnessed that or has firsthand knowledge of that incident to be involved in the completion of this checklist. So that gets submitted either to DDSN, or if you have a professional associated with your organization that can review this information, that is also acceptable. The recommendations that come back are required for implementation in an ICF ID. For other residential settings, if your agency does not follow through with the recommendations from the professional, then you need to have adequate documentation for why that did not occur. But there seems to be a little bit of a misunderstanding about whether or not those recommendations are must do, or if they are in fact recommendations. And for the folks who live particularly in the waiver funded settings, they are recommendations, but if you are not following them, then you need to have documentation as to why you are not following them. We want to respect individual choice, and that can be part of your documentation. But you want to completely cover your vetting of that decision. I don't know if there are any questions on that at this time. The other topic I wanted to cover has to do with the Class 1 licensing citations. We've had a couple of issues in recent months related to windows. And I always tell providers that the best bang for your buck when it comes to quality assurance are the unannounced visits that you complete. Make sure that staff are checking windows when you're going out to the homes. Make sure that your program managers or your coordinators or whatever level of management that you want to assign, make sure that they are checking the operation of windows in the bedrooms. We're having far too many examples of windows that have been painted shut or boarded up or whatever the case may be, but that is blocking the person's route of egress, and it is a fire marshal citation, and it is a Class 1 citation, which requires immediate correction. We want to minimize those types of citations and make sure that people have accessibility to leave in the event of an emergency. So just please make sure you're checking on that. And that's all I have today.
Perfect. I'm up next around some TheraP updates. We had a couple questions submitted about some functionality in TheraP in their billing module, and the kind of the way it works. So I really just wanted to say a couple things around TheraP and the use of TheraP for billing. First, the use of TheraP to do your billing is 100% voluntary by your organization. If there are issues related to its functionality, you have other options that you can use in order to bill Medicaid. You can use the web tool, or you can get a vendor on your own to help you with billing. The other thing for you guys to know is that DDSN doesn't really see what you see on your billing side. We do a lot and have a lot to say and do related to all the functionality that leads up to billing, planning, authorization, that kind of stuff. Once it gets into your provider account for billing, we don't see a lot of the things that you do, including we don't really see kind of your billing reports and what happens. So the issue that came up had to do with making changes to claims once they had been generated for payment. And so I did a little bit of research, talked to a finance director who brought the issue up, talked to TheraP. I think maybe there was some confusion about what was being said and how it was being done related to billing. Anyway, long story short, I think one of the things I learned there is it's probably a good time to facilitate a meeting between providers and TheraP related to their billing and the billing functionality. So the finance directors, I guess, have a meeting coming up, so I asked them for some suggestions or issues that they're having with the Thera billing system so that I can maybe design a training that Thera can do for finance directors or maybe others. So just wanted to kind of say that we are absolutely available to help with kind of putting you guys together, but we don't know what reports you need, what doesn't work, what works well, simply because it's not something that we really use or really see on a regular basis in the billing module. So just make sure you keep that line of communication open so that we can make sure that we give that information to Thera when we have our weekly meetings.
Do we send that feedback to you, Lori, or to you, Quincy?
So you can send the Thera stuff to me related to billing, but I think that Robin Hickman is trying to pull together some information to get back to me, because we actually have an on-site meeting with Thera this week. So I kind of said, if you can get me anything before Wednesday, I can kind of put that in front of them. But even not around finance, we did a training burst when all this started. And I think the questions that you guys had then are very different from the questions you have now. You've been using it for almost a year, right? And so now, in the beginning, it was really just about trying to figure out how to submit a claim and get paid. And you didn't really think through the whole process and some of the things you might need. So we just need to make sure that we are requesting of Thera any enhancements that are needed to help you with the stuff that you're doing.
Lori, does it only have to be billing related, or can it be?
No, it can be other stuff. I do think that anything that you can do as a group is super helpful to me, right? Like anytime we can get a comment or a suggestion and we know it's coming from people versus person, it helps us understand whether it's something Margie wants or something that everybody would find beneficial. And I don't mean that stuff you want is less, but you know what I mean? Like it's easier to go to Thera and say, we've gotten this from the whole group of the community, of the Service Coordination Task Force on this coalition, right? Or, I mean, I just think that holds more weight when we do that kind of thing.
You need it by Wednesday?
No.
Okay, good.
No, absolutely not. I mean, it's an ongoing thing, right? Like the finance stuff was concerning because I think the provider felt like they were being told to do something they didn't think was the right thing to do. And I think really the issue is the provider could get to that information without getting to claim submission. There's reports you can run through attendance to do double checking before you generate claims, right? There's a different workflow that would have taken all of the issue away. So the problem is Thera needs to communicate that to the provider so that they know that up front.
But there are some things you can do in other states that are limited here, though, just from my experience.
Sure. I think,
I don't know if it's a South Carolina.
well, some of it is around the way we built stuff in Thera. So think about it this way. In our state, the whole process from authorization to billing starts in the plan, because it's got to be approved in the plan, then it's got to be generated by the case manager, then it's got to be sent to the provider, and then the provider can take that and assign it. In some states, it's not a state oversight system, it's a provider system. And in that state, the provider does all of that in the provider account because it's not tied that way, right? So there might look different ways in different things. And I am perfectly willing to do anything in the billing system that helps you as long as it doesn't break anything on my end, right? Because the billing stuff is not DDSN. That's something that we just made available to the providers to bill directly. So we absolutely want you guys to be able to use that and do what you need to do with it. There's some requests for business intelligence and having information available through business intelligence. I think that's something that we can definitely take back to Thera. I will tell you, there are certain things in that system that are in our contract and certain things that aren't. So we can only turn loose to you what we have paid for. So, but I'll, have them. It's been a while since I've talked about BI with Thera, so I don't really know what pieces of it are available. All right, do y'all have any questions about Thera? Okay, good deal. Next is Janet.
Good afternoon, y'all. I'm still trying to spring forward. Provider qualifications. So as most of you know, probably about 23 years ago, DDSN started trying to recruit and enroll providers who are not DSN boards, which is about all DDSN had at the time in terms of providers. And over that 23-year period, it's been a request for proposals, also known as an RFP, and then we changed to a fixed price bid. And we've had that for a while, and now the agency thinks we may soon have the approval to not have to procure providers through either of those processes anymore, which is a lot of words to say we think the process is going to be easier to apply. And we are actively working on those provider qualifications. We're very close to having the qualifications piece together. It's the route that we have to still wait on. So we have to get the state fiscal accountability authority to say yay or nay. And when they say yay or nay, which is before the end of the month, then we'll know whether we have to go back to MMO to go through their process, or if we can move forward with a less regimented process for getting providers enrollment. Now, DDSN is more or less vetting providers for many services. So we're only saying that, yes, they are qualified, and then we're kind of pushing them over to Medicaid to say, please enroll. So that's a little different than what we've done before. And that is for most waiver services. But there are some services that DDSN still pays for, like early intervention, the 3 to 6, DDSN still pays the provider. So new providers would have to enroll with us for us to have a contract in order to pay them at all. There are services like intake that are just DDSN services. Case management has all the crazy with state-funded case management, Medicaid targeted case management, and waiver case management. So we're trying to lump those together. Qualified for one, qualified for all. And then for most services, we're letting it be known that while the vast majority of those services are funded through waiver funds paid for by Medicaid, there are people who are state funded for those same services. So for residential, I mean, if you looked at the percentage of people in residential services across the state, whether it's ICF or residential habilitation through the waiver, it's probably 98% are Medicaid funded either through a waiver or through an ICF, but there are still like 2% that are state funded. And in some cases, people may be state funded for a short period of time until waiver funding becomes available. So in order for DDSN to pay a provider for any state funded services, you also have to have a contract with us. So that process, what we're hoping to do is make it simple enough that we can get the providers enrolled. Anytime you're talking about provider qualifications, you have a choice to make. You can have a wide gate and take people in, which is fine. The agency itself has been criticized for having a gate that was too narrow when we first started it, and we made it wider. We probably made it too wide. Then we kind of came back toward the middle a little. I've worked here too long. But anytime your gate is kind of wide with people coming in, you have to have an effective quality management process to catch early people that are not complying. So right now, we're kind of looking at that medium to wide gate and beefing up the quality management process on the back end to make sure that people don't go too long not doing what they're supposed to. We should have an update by the end of the month on the direction that we have to take, and shortly thereafter posting the process. Well, if it goes the way we hope, shortly thereafter, we'll post the process. If it doesn't, then in about 6 months, we'll
Yeah,
hear that it's been posted by the,
if it doesn't, minimally, we'll post the process for waiver.
right, we'll
providers,
post the
right?
process.
So waiver, we're gonna, by the 1st of April-ish, there'll be a process out there. We are hoping for all provider, right? All provider types, all providers. But minimally, we're gonna post a process that'll get you qualified to go over to Medicaid to enroll as a provider. That's, we gotta get some providers in the state.
That's it for my update, unless there are questions.
All right, Harley, I don't have any here.
So I just have a quick communications update, and that's specifically communications between the providers and us here at DDSN. So I just wanted to note 2 things. There were some questions that came in related to when directives will be updated. And just as a reminder, I think I said this last month too, but directives are always open for comment. Whenever comments are made on directives, Lori gets notified pretty much immediately that there's been a comment made. So we'll definitely use that information as we plan for directive reviews and updates. So again, if there's one that you think is, something that needs to be addressed, please comment on it, and we'll get it moving in the review update process. And so I just wanted to remind y'all that that's always available, and that we find out about it pretty much immediately, right, when comments are made on these directives.
Carly, I have a question. Can I go ahead and ask that, or?
Yeah, that's related to
Okay.
that.
So we were in our coalition meeting on Friday, this came up, and we were talking about how you can go and you can see the comments that are made on the directives, but there's times where it might say in red, it may say taken under advisement, but the person that submitted the comment doesn't really ever get any kind of more feedback on that. So under advisement, then I guess we're to basically know that it was taken under advisement, but then when the directive comes out, I guess you find out what the outcome was. But providers were just kind of trying to figure out, when they do the comments, is there any way to kind of give a little bit more concrete feedback versus we'll take it under consideration?
So, if it says taken under advisement, that means we thought about it, we decided not to do it, right? So are you asking that we tell you why we're not doing it?
Well, I just think that it would help us understand a little bit better if we got a little bit more meat on the bone with that.
You can take a stab at it, but I'm hesitant to spend a whole lot of time explaining, right? Like, that's gonna take a good bit of, we'll think about it.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yes.
We'll think about what we
Take it
can
under
do about it.
advisement.
So sometimes
Sometimes it would take more than the length of the directive.
Right.
To
Understand.
fully explain why we can't do what we're being asked to do. Because I
so,
know with a couple that I was
Yeah.
involved with, it was that way. In order to fully explain, it would take more sentences than the directive was itself.
and we only say that when we don't do anything with it, right? Otherwise, we will tell you we added it, we didn't add it. So if it says taken under advisement, we didn't make changes based on it, right? So, but we will make an effort. How about that?
I understand what you're saying, and I think when we can, and it's,
We should.
we
I
should,
agree with
right?
that.
And so when it's more complicated, we can figure out sort of how we can deal with that. But I think that we can make a good faith effort where it's possible to address them.
And can y'all go over, because I'm sure it was a little confusing in this room, out in provider land, it was a little confusing on Thursday at the commission meeting as far as the policy procedure and the flow of that. Could y'all clarify that a little bit for us? That would be awesome.
Sure. So I'm gonna give you the procedure prior to the commission meeting,
Okay.
okay?
Okay.
Prior to the commission meeting, the workflow went like this. I know it because it's my life, right? Staff grabs the policy, makes changes, presents it to the policy committee for review and approval. Policy committee approves it to go out for public comment. It goes out for public comment for 10 days. It comes back. Staff replies to any comments that come in, sometimes not as well as we should, right, Heather? But we go in and we reply to all the comments. The policy with all the comments and the replies goes back to the policy committee for review and approval. The policy committee either makes changes or approves it to go to the commission. It goes to the commission for final approval. It goes out, right? So that's the current workflow. The change that was made at the commission meeting is, at least for this month and until they change it again, the policy is changed by staff. It goes out for public comment. Comments are received, comments are replied to, and then the policy goes to policy committee, who then approves it to move on for commission approval. The reason they changed it is because that first workflow is literally a 2 to 3 month process, right? Depending on when you grab it, because you got to have the 10 days, you just got to go here, there's got to be a meeting, right? So sometimes it takes 2 to 3 months to get policies approved. And we're trying our dead level best to get this audit policy out to you by May, because we hear you that we've been really late in years past getting it out, right? So hopefully that workflow will go faster.
Do you anticipate it will with that flow?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to go to the policy committee twice with that workflow. In the first workflow, it did, right? It had to go there, it had to go out for public comment, had to go back. Now it just has to go to the policy committee once, and then it has to go to the full commission. The only, the only thing about it is if the policy committee makes significant changes, it won't go back out for public comment before it goes to the commission for approval. Okay. But at that point, we would just bring it back through the whole process if we needed to change it again.
Is that related to this topic, Lori, or you have me go on?
So I think somebody else said they don't get replies to the comments that the policy committee gets. But it is in the packet that goes to the commission and to the policy committee, right? So the commission packet has the actual policy as well as anything with all of the markup and the comments and replies, right? So that's where you can find it.
So the other thing I just wanted to address was the questions and comments that came in regarding provider contracts. So thank y'all for sending that in, and keep it coming, because we will plan to meet in early April to review and address those specific questions and feedback. And so if y'all send anything in between that meeting and today, we'll include it in that discussion. And so we'll be following up with communication back out if we need clarification, or to sort of say, yes, we can make that change, or if not, provide that justification why. So I just wanted y'all to know that we have them, and we're going to review them, and we'll provide, formal feedback and a formal response to those questions. And so that'll be forthcoming, but we'll start working on it very soon, because I know that timeliness is a factor for the contracts as well. And we want to make sure that, we're all in agreement, so that when it comes through DocuSign, everybody's on the same page. So just thank you for that, and just know that, we will be working on that in the coming weeks. So, and then just a reminder, please continue to send your questions into us. I think the last few months have worked out really well with us really designing our agenda around, y'all's questions, y'all's needs. And so we want to continue that. So please just keep them coming. That's it for me.
All right, I'm trying to hurry through so we can get to y'all's topics that you can talk about. The provider focus group, I sent an email to Tyler and to Rick to ask for 3 representatives from each of the provider associations to tackle some complex problems, right? So our first issue that we're going to tackle as a focus group is going to be around access to services. We have got to do some provider recruitment or provider support because we have an extremely large list of people who need to access services and nowhere for them to go. So what we're really trying to do, and it's not just residential, it's case management too. Like I got case management cases sitting up here that I can't find a case management provider for. So I'm really looking for ideas about ways that DDSN could support the provider network. Not about rates, right? Because I can't really do anything about rates, but is there a way that we can support you in order to do that? So that's first item of business. I will tell you that I appreciate that several providers want to participate in this focus group. So I really want to keep it small. So for this first meeting, it's going to be the 6 people that were given to me by the provider associations. But I have a topic coming right behind it. And what I think would be the right thing to do is perhaps we can rotate people in and out to do the provider focus group. So it's not always just the same 6 people. Some of the stuff might be more finance oriented and you might want to have different people. Some of it might be more case management oriented and you might want to have more case management representation. Some of it might be very residential specific. So you might not need as much case management representation. So I just say that. Just so everybody knows too, the representatives for this first group are Margie Williamson, Thoyd Warren, Elizabeth Krause, Beth Bungie, Stacy Johnson, and Heather Waddell. So if you have ideas about how we can support you in provider access, get with those folks because I really want them to represent your organizations and not just be there for their own.
Lori, did you get the email from Friday about us requesting a 4th? Just that
Right.
financial, and I know what you just said about the finance, but we were
Right.
just kind of thinking through because so many of the topics that we may be talking about, some of us, have limited the financial aspect. And so along with Quincy, trying to have that perspective. So that's why, so you're really wanting to just stick with the 6.
I am. So I think if you want a financial person or if your organization wants a financial person for this topic, maybe you should swap out one of the others because it doesn't have to be private case manager or private residential board, right? I just did that to kind of see. I wanted to make sure it wasn't like 3 of the same type of provider. So if you want to swap out for this first one, that's fine too. Okay.
And if you'll get those topics, whoever is going to do it, like if it's there, if we can get those topics a little bit ahead of time, I
Yep.
like to staff things with my staff to
For sure.
ensure that they're giving feedback as well. So I'm not just speaking on behalf of what I see.
100%. So I think we probably will have our first meeting in a couple of weeks. So you got a couple of weeks to get on this topic. And then when we go to the next topic, I'll try to give you guys some lead time. We just need, we need to hear from you to try to figure out what we can do to help in this area. Okay.
So the last item are some topic areas that providers sent in. So it's really open discussion for y'all about really any of these or none of these, or if there's something else on here or that's not on here, this sort of open for y'all. Or I see that there's some questions, Lori. Is there anything that we need to address before we turn it over?
Yeah, so one of them is about time for public comment. And, at this point, I have to do kind of what the commission says. I think maybe as the policy committee morphs, we can look at the idea that there might be some policies that need to be out there for more than 10 days, but that's going to be at the will of the commission. And then the other one is just some ideas related to this provider accessibility.
Okay, great, okay. Turn over to you.
Well, thanks. I had requested Senate Bill 602 to be put on the agenda, so thanks for putting it on there. And I would not, there's several elements to this legislation, obviously, and it changes almost daily, it feels like. And I would not expect or anticipate DDSN to comment on the elements related to the commission and state director. However, there's another big chunk of this proposed legislation that impacts the provider network. And so I guess I had a couple of just quick questions. As the providers are trying to follow this and anticipate changes, and we recognize that it's not the first time that legislation like this has been proposed, but this one seems to have real traction and it would be inappropriate for the provider network to just ignore it, saying, oh, this has been proposed before, nothing will come of it. So the provider network is actively trying to provide input and asking questions and providing feedback to the sponsors of this bill. And as providers, are there perspectives, feedback, comments from DDSN related to the provider specific elements that you feel like we need to be discussing? And then also, I guess, just by way of comment to Margaret and HHS, since you happen to be in the room, that's great. There are elements as providers were thinking through the way that our business model will change if we no longer, as providers, have access to insurance and other elements through when we were political subdivisions. Our cost reports are built around us having access to state health plan and insurance. Those things may or may not, but they may change, and our cost reports wouldn't be reflecting the reality of now market-based, a fully market-based business model. So by way of comment and just feedback, that's something as this legislation works its way through, to be considering that our rates are going to be reflective of us participating in state programs that we may not have access to in the future. Having said all that, and I acknowledge that this topic could consume, 3 hours and still walk away without any more advancement than we have right now. I just appreciate you putting the topic on the agenda and wanted to, as it is a big elephant in the room, wanted to, in the name of just openness and transparency, make sure we had an opportunity for feedback.
I'll speak at one time.
From a DDSN perspective, I think, we're gonna continue our mission regardless of what happens with this legislation. And we're not going to comment on the legislation unless we're asked by people at the General Assembly, Governor's office. Is that pretty accurate?
And by comment, she doesn't mean take a position. So they may ask us questions like, what's the fiscal impact of, originally when the bill came out, it said you guys would become a part of DDSN. So we spent a lot of time, by we, I mean Quincy, spent a lot of time exploring fiscal impact.
Right.
There were also some other unintended consequences, like had they considered conflict case-free management. By the time we got there to give them the fiscal impact, it had changed.
Right.
So Quincy spent days and nights
Right.
preparing all that documentation,
Yeah.
only to be told that day of, oh, we've scratched that. So we are providing insight as far as when we are told, because right now we are told information or we're asked direct questions about, well, if it's structured this way, what are the unintended consequences that you guys can see? I just would encourage you guys as providers to go directly to the sponsors of the bill. The driving force for this bill is Senator Shealy. I believe some of you guys have already met with her because we don't have any control or any more insight that you would have. We find out day of also.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we are in contact with Senator Shealy's office and totally understand and appreciate the comments you made and the position that you're in. I get that.
But if there are things that you think that we haven't thought about, like Janet thought about conflict case management, if you want to provide those to us so that way when they're asking us for our opinion as the experts, we can say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about the fact that now this changes, we just went fee for service. If you bring them up under us, that undoes fee for service. Those are things that I think that they haven't thought about, and it's our job to say, if this, then that. And we are happy to answer those questions, but we won't take a position on the bill.
Yeah, well, we prepared for Senator Shealy's office, it's essentially exactly that, saying questions, have you considered this, have you considered that? And now that we have time, some breathing room, we certainly can run that by you guys to just make sure, hey, did we miss anything that we should be thinking through? You know, in the moment, as you said, it happened so fast, we really didn't have time to vet it beyond just our provider network. It was so fast, just give us your questions and concerns, boom, and it was kind of off to the races, so.
And my understanding that the next meeting in regards to this bill is Wednesday. And I don't know what time.
9.
So.
Yeah.
I don't know better. than that.
Well, yeah, we're.
And I'm not
stay
sure
on it.
what will happen at that meeting. So I don't know if there'll be more changes, or it'll be the same as what we heard at the last meeting. We won't know till we show up on Wednesday morning.
Thank you.
So we are at time, I guess. Are there any final questions since it is
There's
3?
one comment about conflict-free case management that, you know, I see, and it's really around offering choice, particularly around this last 29% of people that we have in conflict, and trying to be mindful about offering choice and making sure that they are transferred well in advance, and we know groups of people. That's something that I think we can tackle in this focus group related to provider access, because I think that's kind of key. We got to make sure we have access for those people in the best way possible.
And I will say, if y'all have any feedback on this in-person meeting, because we'll have another one in 3 months, you know, you can send that to the email address, the forum agenda one, and we'll take it into consideration as we plan for the one in, I guess, June. So thank you for coming, though. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
So one more question.
So Elizabeth Kraus just sent a message, and we intended to cover this. She asked about summer support being available.
Hello, summer support.
Quincy forgot you.
Yes.
It is our intention for summer support to be available this year.
Right, and we'll send some information out as soon as we can related to that. Okay, thanks for checking me, Elizabeth.